Welcome everyone once again to Transformed YouTube channel. I am Muiwa and with me here is Jude. We've been doing our very best to bring you top-notch content on spirituality, theology, the big questions of life, and some questions in your heart. We hope we have been preemptive in answering some of the questions in your heart, but when you share the questions in the comments, would specifically focus on those. Today, we want to go deeper again in, although in a slightly different direction, but still follows from what we talked about in our last video, which we titled Dangers of Spirituality. In that video, we addressed one main danger, which is the tendency for people who are seeking to connect to God, who are seeking to be spiritual, the danger of always collapsing God and His creation. We said that specifically because we believe that God fills His creation, which we explained in the last video. Yes, God fills His creation, and for those of us who are Christians, Bible-believing Christians, one way we can show that is that the story of the Bible is ultimately about God becoming human in Christ Jesus. And even in His human state, we found Jesus praying one of the psalms that calls in a psalm in which the psalmist called himself a worm, and we believe Jesus identified with all of that. So God fills all things. He's God. He became human, and he even called himself the smallest of creature, a worm. Maybe if we're speaking in today's term, the psalmist would have said, I'm a bacteria, the smallest thing you can identify. So that's to say God fills everything. And we said the danger there, because of that reality, the fact that you can find God's presence and power, that's another way of saying God fills everything. You can find God's presence and power in different places of creation in this world. There's this danger of collapsing God and His creation. And we are saying, always take note not to fall for that. Do not ever find yourself worshiping the creature simply because you find presence and power in it. It's God's presence and power, and it should ultimately direct your attention and your worship to God. But in that video, we closed by saying this, that if that is the case, how then do we resolve the fact that we shouldn't collapse God and the creation and God becoming man and calling Himself a worm? And we hinted at it, that's ultimately about humility. And today we want to talk about God's humility. So you are welcome once again. I trust you're going to learn a lot and you will be blessed. So to get into it, in talking about God's humility, we are going to be pushing back on other dangers of spirituality. So how does talking about God's humility help to prevent or to push back against certain dangers of spirituality? It's all about the paradox of reality, the paradox of this world we live in. Yes, this world is filled with paradoxes. And maybe to clarify, what do I mean by paradoxes? Of course, we all know the English term and what it means, but I want to explain it this way. Paradoxes are things we come across that are against what our intuition normally tells us is the case. There are many things we experience in this world. Before we dig deep, before we get any deep dive into it, there are certain things our intuition tells us about them. But when we get deeper into them, it begins to correct what our intuition tells us. Not that our intuition is misguided or isn't working properly, but simply because the world is full of paradoxes. And I want to pick up on one paradox today. It is the upside down reality of this world. I want to pick up on that. Let me give you a very good example. All creature wants to survive. There is that drive to stay alive and to want to persist for as long as possible. And one way our intuition, or now maybe instinct, to use a crude form of intuition, our instinct might suggest that the best way to survive is to just gather and gather and gather and to simply try to save yourself. That's what instinct and maybe intuition tells us, to try to gather and save yourself. But as human history has told us, the best way humans survive is when we work together, not when one person tries to save themselves and heap up for themselves. Humans survive, humanity survives, you survive, I survive when we work with others. When we try to follow that natural impulse to survive, that drive to be alive, to persist for as long as possible, when you try to follow that base instinct and the intuition that normally emerges from that, you might be inclined towards just heaping up for yourself. But as you go deeper in life, like I said, as human history has told us, humanity only survives when we work together, when we do things together, when you don't only save up for yourself, but you save up for your neighbor and you save up for your spouse. And maybe if you are struggling with saving up for your neighbor, you do understand that you have to take care of your spouse. If you want to have kids, you have to take care of your spouse, or else that won't work. And you cannot only just take care of you and your spouse, you have to take care of your children. But the natural instinct to survive, as with all animals, as with all plants, can often be just for you. But we have to learn that life works better in a different mode. Now, that's a low level of a paradox of reality. That language, you can find that language ultimately in the Bible, the highest form of such paradoxes. And am I referencing? It's that part of the Bible that says, he who wants to save his life will lose it. And he who is willing to lose it will ultimately gain it. It's a paradox. Even today we struggle with believing that. But Jesus, being an unusual human, everyone from every tradition would agree with that. He says to everyone, he who tries to hold on to his life will lose it, but he who is willing to let it go will find it again. It's a paradox. And like I said, the natural instinct that you find in plants and animals and even humans is one paradox. And what we learn through human history and through the history of the world, what we learn there, we realize, oh, there's a paradox in there. That's one paradox. And you come to the Bible, you find one of the highest levels of that paradox. I mentioned those two examples to say life is full of paradoxes. But how does this come into the God's humility? God's humility is also a paradox. And those of us who seek to be spiritual, who seek to connect with God, we often meet with a paradox when we seek to connect with God. One danger of spirituality, when people begin to seek to be spiritual, one danger we can fall into is to begin to heap up ideas about God. And you might think of God as someone who stands aloof, or as some people like to say, an absentee father. You can think of God in that manner. Or to bring it home, the reason why you struggle with the idea of God becoming man is because it's a paradox. That's not the way our intuition normally goes. Our intuition imagines that if God truly is, he's going to be big and bossy and, scary and rule and oppress and dominate, only to find that the true God who is revealed in Christ Jesus is nothing like that. It's a paradox. Because for us, if you have power, our danger is always to use power to oppress other people. That's the danger we find ourselves in. And then comes the issue of how God's humility up to push back against dangers of spirituality. When people begin to pursue spirituality and they begin to feel connected and feel some form of presence and power, we also fall into the danger of using whatever access to power we have as a means of oppressing or putting down other people. It's a danger many of us fall into. When you begin to follow that path, that spiritual path, and you begin to have certain experiences, you either start to think you are not on same level with others, you start to put yourself above them. That's one form. Or depending on, if it's not just experience, but you begin to get access to some form of power, you are tempted to try to oppress people. But that's the paradox and the humility put together. Because when we taste power, our natural impulse is to oppress, is to put others down. That's the way we often imagine God too, because we know if he's God, then he's the most powerful being, person. Is all powerful, as many traditions have described him. He has all power with him. And if that's the case, we are always in danger of arrogating human weaknesses to him. And yes, it's a human weakness to seek to be above, because like I'm saying, that's the exact opposite of what the true God did. The true God chose to humble himself. He chose to become a man and even called himself a worm. When you think of God from now on, stop thinking about the bossy God who is trying to oppress everyone as you would if you were him. Stop thinking about that kind of God. Think about the God who wants to let everyone know that he is not an absentee father. He is not one who tries to stay aloof and stay away just to prove he's greater than all of us. He is willing to step down into humanity to show us that he wants to identify with us on every level, and is willing to refer to himself as a worm. He is willing, and this is a mystery, he is willing to say on the cross, Father, why have you forsaken me? Theologians talk about the God-forsakenness of God. If your mind is still wobbling, it's a good thing, because you need to unsettle some of your old beliefs and need to begin to rearrange the furnitures of your theology, of your spirituality, of how you think about God, how you think about the world, and how you think about yourself. It's good if your thoughts are unsettled. I'm glad I unsettled you today. Maybe in the next video, I'll help you to gather it out together once again. Have a lovely time, and we'll catch up in our next video.